Welcome to the Dyson Leadership Podcast. I'm excited with the guest that I have with me today, John Richardson. He is a former colleague of mine, somebody that I worked with in the supply chain logistics industry. And John is a wealth of information when it comes to continuous improvement, process improvement, and was excited when I reached out. He was willing to jump on, do a podcast interview with us. And I know you're going to be excited to hear what he has to say. Specifically, we're going to be talking about cultivating a culture of failure or for failure. And something when we hear failure, a lot of people get kind of concerned. They get a little worried. It's not a topic a lot of people like to deal with, but we've got some really great things to talk about. So, John, I want to start off and let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about some of the work you do and a little about yourself for our audience, and then we'll dive into our conversation for today.
Sure. Appreciate you having me, Nick.
Yeah.
So, as Nick said, I'm John Richardson. I'm managing partner at Tone Solutions. We're a supply chain consulting firm. Focus a lot on process improvement, supply chain analytics, leadership coaching, and team development. Just for my background, out of college, went into the Marine Corps, spent about 3 years as a Marine officer. Then went back, picked up a master's, and started my logistics career at JB Hunt Logistics, and then did what we affectionately call the Northwest Arkansas two-step, and went from JB Hunt up to Walmart, where I did a lot of network design there. Got introduced to that, then got into consulting, then back to the 3PL world, where I met Nick, and now back to consulting. So it's kind of been an interesting ride. Been doing it a little over 25 years. So a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that's one thing here in your experience when we worked together. It was always, wow, this guy has done a ton of stuff. And you were always fun to talk to because you had stories and all kinds of experience to share. So it was always great chatting. I've enjoyed, even before we record this podcast, we're sitting here chatting and catching up and talking about different stuff. So it's been fun. But for our topic today, cultivating a culture of failure. Again, failure is something a lot of people don't like to deal with. They see it in strictly the negative context. They see it strictly as, oh, I've failed. I've done this wrong. This doesn't work. And they only focus on the negative. But when we talk about cultivating a culture for failure, and kind of spinning it in a more positive way, can you go ahead and start us off and kind of explain how you see this and how you would define it? How would you explain this as maybe more of a positive thing for an organization?
Sure. I think, for people, accepting failure and not making it such a punitive event is really about empowering your people. It's letting them know it's okay to take risks. Say going back to my Marine Corps days, if you just, beat somebody up every time they fail, well, they're not going to try something new because they're going to be scared of it. So you want people to get out there and stretch their comfort zone, kind of push the edge of the envelope, and know that at the end of the day, you've got their back. Because people, what they learn from a failure, much more than they'll remember from a lot of success.
That's true. And I know for me, failure's definitely been a learning opportunity. Even this podcast, for example, I had started a podcast, kind of another topic, another genre, another focus, and I did it poorly and failed miserably at it. And struggled to get anybody to listen. And a lot of it was my own fault. And I remember as I was kind of doing the autopsy after the fact and looking back at it, was realizing, okay, I should have done this instead. I could have done this better and so on. And so kind of two ways I could take that as myself being solo is one, I could have taken that as a negative and say, okay, I'm not good at podcasting, not good at any of this online content. I'm never doing it again. And that would have been the end of it. Or could take it and say, okay, what did I learn? How can I improve? And how can I do it better? And that's ultimately where we ended up here with the Dyson Leadership Podcast. I'm trying to do it better and do better content. So, for an organization, I know you've got a lot of thoughts we've talked about for this topic, but for an organization, how do you think we can move the mindset from focusing so much as on failure as the negative to getting them to see positive? What do you think would be the way to shift the mindset? Because I think a lot of it's just a mindset focus.
Yeah, you really have to have leadership that's willing to accept it. And, maybe we need to kind of differentiate between good failure and bad failure. Somebody taking a risk with good intentions and, pushing the envelope, and then it just doesn't work out the way they wanted to. That's a good failure. A bad failure is, you know, willing, something that doesn't have integrity, something that is negligent, doing it again. I know one of your old bosses. She was okay with something happening once, but not twice.
Yeah.
And so, so I think you've got that concept of good and bad failure. But as I say, it all comes down to leadership and having a leader that's willing to teach, that's willing to not be prescriptive in what you tell people to do. So, you explain the intent of what you want, what's the end result you're looking for, and then let them find their way. Be there for questions and things, but kind of force them to figure it out. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to, and it's going to be fine. Would it be the way that maybe I would have done it? Maybe not. But again, if it's the end result that matters, how you get there, it's okay.
Yeah. And I know there's so many times where the leadership sets the tone entirely for a team or an organization, where how the leader responds to different situations is how the rest of the team's going to follow suit. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for those that may be listening to the podcast, if you're a leader and you have a bad relationship with failure and you just shut down, you're overly critical, you don't learn from it, it creates such a negative atmosphere around you as a person, then your team's going to be the same way. They're going to see how you handle situations, how you handle failure, and they're going to have similar situations. Kind of like the former boss of mine you reference. Yeah, if something goes wrong, something goes bad one time, okay, we'll figure it out, we'll teach, we'll work through it. But let's not have this happen again. Let's fix it, figure out what went wrong, correct it, and then we've got a process in place so it doesn't happen again. What that does for somebody like me that was working under a manager like that, I would evaluate my own work in that way. Okay, I tried something, it didn't work. How can I evaluate this? What can I do better? How can I tweak different things? Can I create a new process, a new strategy? Okay, yes, I figured out this. Now that's how I'm going to do it moving forward. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of do that problem solving and go through it.
Yeah, there's a big element, depending on what level of leadership and everything. People have to know, their immediate leader, the one that enabled them to go make the mistake because they didn't micromanage them. They have to know they have his back, and that as a leader, if your team fails, it's really your failure,
It's
because
true.
you're there to help them. And so, there are a lot of times things went wrong, and I would step up and it would be, yeah, this is on me. I'm going to come in and fix this, and not throwing, my people under the bus and forcing them to take the blame more publicly, because, they knew what had happened. And, there's no point in beating them up. It's just, okay, now how do you fix it?
Sure. Absolutely. So one thing I want to circle back to and have you kind of go a little bit further when we differentiate between good failure versus bad failure. Can you do a little bit more in-depth explaining for our audience how somebody might view a couple different situations and we can truly differentiate good failure versus bad failure in kind of a professional setting? If you have maybe a couple examples you could think of.
Well, kind of one thing about, particularly the logistics industry, when you start talking about constraints in business, sometimes there's not a right answer. I'm just going to make up an example of, let's say you got somebody that's, brokering loads, and he's got one truck and two loads that have to go. Well, okay, so maybe one of them is for your biggest client, and the other one is a super critical, load for a new client. Well, you may not make the right decision. You may make the decision that, and your judgment is the right one, but everybody above you at each level may have a different, definition of what you should have done. So, I think also you have situations where, particularly when we were doing analytics, people make mistakes, honest mistakes. Maybe they didn't know something about, minimum charges in the analysis that really changed the whole nature of it. And so, you get the kind of mistakes that happen because we didn't train them well enough. We didn't teach them what they needed to know. And people don't know what they don't know. And so, sometimes people just make the wrong decision or make that mistake out of ignorance. And so you want to train them, about that, because like you said, you're never going to forget that lesson
Yeah.
because you learned it the hard way. I heard a story when I was in grad school. No idea if it's true or not, but back in the day, at a major corporation made a mistake. It was $1 million mistake, and he went into his boss to turn in his resignation, and his boss looked at him and said, "Why would I, fire you? Because I just spent $1 million educating you." And I think a lot of times companies, yeah, somebody cost them some money, but odds are that they won't ever do that again.
Yeah.
So, um, so those are, just some examples of some good kind of mistakes. The bad ones, we've kind of talked about the same mistake over and over and over again. You can't have that. Not paying attention at all. Those are the kinds of things that you can't have as a company or a leader. So I think you have to look at it in those perspectives. Sometimes, and this is a mutual friend of ours that taught a lot of lean principles. He would always say it's about the process, and if your process is solid, your people can be successful. And so sometimes you need to look at, did someone fail because the process failed, not because it was something that they did.
Yeah, that's a good call out because there's sometimes we have processes in organizations that there's a no win scenario, and it's truly the process. And whoever you put in, however much experience or knowledge they may have, they may not be able to succeed because of that. So I think that's a great point. Just a couple thoughts that came to mind as you were talking about it. One thing that I always do, and I think this also segues into our next point we'll kind of talk about, but one thing I always do when I do leadership training and leadership workshops, classes, is the post workshop, post class kind of audit and looking back. And I think this is good for a leader in any kind of situation. If you're implementing a new process, a new project, changes on your team, doing an audit after the fact to go back and look and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what was successful, what was a failure. And it's looking at both sides of it because you can see what worked well, what didn't work well. So for me, in doing leadership workshops, I will sit down typically with a journal or a notebook and say, okay, were there slides? Was there content? Was there pictures, imagery, a video? Did it work? Did it resonate with the audience? Did it not? Was there a topic that worked? Was there one that did not? Even for this podcast, I'm looking through analytics as I'm posting episodes. What did more people listen to? Were they more engaged in certain topics versus others? And trying to look what works, what doesn't work. Because if something works and is very successful, how can I implement more of that to continue to improve moving forward? If something is not successful, was it because maybe the content was bad? Or was it because of the presentation or something the person did?
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what it is, identify, and if it can be improved and turned around to be something good, learn from the issue, the problem, the failure, whatever it is, and improve. If it's a success, keep doing it. Just keep doing that and keep improving upon it, because you don't want to do just the same thing exactly the same way. You want to still find ways to improve ultimately. But that's something I do after pretty much every single class and workshop that I do. And I tell people that's a leadership mindset that you need to get into of look at the wins, look at the losses, both of them. There's a lot of people, they look at failures and they say, okay, I'm never going to do that again because it failed. And they refuse to learn from it. And there's some people, they look at the success and they sit back and they just say, well, I really nailed that one. I knocked it out of the park. That was a win. Great. Let's move on to the next thing. And they fail to build upon their success. So there's both sides of it you have to learn from and really look at. So from your perspective, I know you've got a background, continuous improvement, the leadership and everything else. Let's talk about the process improvement coming out of a culture for failure. Truly, when you have this environment that embraces failure is okay. Yes, we can learn from it. Yes, there's opportunities to grow and improve our organization, our teams, our people. What kind of processes or mindset can we get into for improvement in that type of leadership culture?
Sure. No, that's great point there. I think, part of accepting failure is also accepting that things can be better. And you want people to be looking for those things to say, oh, well, that's not working right. So, we've got to fix it. And as a leader, you don't want to, you know, be that person that as soon as somebody comes and says something's wrong or it can be better, you argue with them, instead of hearing them out. And so, you know, as you identify these things, you kind of have to think, okay, well, how do you fix it? But your solution may not work. And so, this also comes into the whole failure thing. It's so much better and depending on the stakes, obviously,
Sure.
to go ahead and try something. And if it works, great. If it's not, figure it out fast and adjust. My continuous improvement friend, he's always preaching, try the experiment and fail fast. So if you're going to fail, just make it happen, but go ahead and try. That's part of, being accepting. If people are scared that, they're going to get beat up if it doesn't work, well, they're going to do analysis paralysis and make sure that the risk is really, really small.
Yep.
Okay, so they finally implemented it, it works, and it saves all of this. Well, if they just tried it, maybe they didn't spend 6 months trying to figure it out. You would have had 6 more months of benefit. So I think it's being accepting. And I loved what you said about the postmortems that you do. There's a gentleman named Gus Pagonis. He was the head. He was in charge of logistics in Desert Storm, and then went to Sears as their head of logistics. And one of the things he would tell his subordinates was, if you bring me an idea, you bring me 3 positives and 3 negatives about that idea. And if you can't do either side of that, you're biased. And so you're not looking hard enough for the upsides and the downsides. And you talked about someone that has a success and it's just like, oh, I won, I'm good, goes on, instead of saying, okay, yeah, I won that, but could it have been better? And so now you can kind of take it to the extreme. But this was a lesson for me that I got from my team. My mindset is always, how could it have been better? How could it have been better? And my team eventually came to me and was like, we appreciate that you always want to make it better, but you need to cheer for the things that went well.
Yeah.
you know so because I was like, oh, the success, that was great, but how could it have been even better the next time? So I think you kind of have to strike that balance in celebrating the wins instead of always just looking for, okay, how do we fix this?
Sure. Absolutely. So a couple things came to mind that even from my end, I share about the postmortems after a leadership class, workshop, that kind of thing. But even one thing they taught us, I'm a Maxwell leadership certified coach, trainer. And one of the things they tell us, and it's funny, the first time I heard it, I hated the thoughts of this, but they told us that the first time you do a presentation or you get up and speak in front of a room full of people, you are going to be bad at it.
Yeah.
And it's just that acknowledgement of the first time you try anything, it's probably going to go bad or it's not going to be as good as it could be. And so you always look for, how can I improve? How can I get better? How can I get more practice, reps, whatever it is? It's the same with process improvement. You may implement something and it may not be the perfect fit that first time. But it's that idea of you fail fast, is you implement it, it might fail. Okay, quick, how can we adjust? How can we make the necessary changes, get it back on track the way we need to go, and then it works better. So one
Mm-hmm.
thing, even in my role in human resources, one thing that's kind of, it's in my job description, kind of buried down in there somewhere, is process improvement. And so one thing that I look at heavily is, okay, if we have a process and can improve it, what can we implement quickly? What can we implement that's sustainable long term? And is there a balance between the two that we can implement quickly and would work long term? Or can we change something short term to make an improvement while we work on the long term solution? Like, you're looking at all the different options. And sometimes it may be, okay, let's just jump to the more long term option, even if we're not 100% ready, so we can get it started and we can learn and we can adjust as needed and go from there. And I know from my time where we worked together in the 3PL world, there were instances of, okay, we've got some manual things, we've got different processes that need improving. Let's look at them, let's make these adjustments, and let's do that. I've taken that mindset and translated it over to the HR world, where it's, okay, we've got these processes, how can we do it better? And there's actually a fun relationship I have with one of my coworkers where she is an ideas person. I am not great with ideas. And so she can come to me and say, Nick, I've got this idea for this process. Can we adjust it this way? Can we use our technology to do this, this, and this? And I'm sitting there going, I've never thought of this. That's actually a great idea. I'll set it up. I'll do it. And I'll say, we'll try it next week. Like, I'm ready. Like, I'll put it in. We'll try it. If it works, great. If it fails, we'll figure it out and make the adjustments. Because I'm more of that, let's jump at it, see what we can do. If it makes an improvement, run with it. She's the ideas person. Sometimes you need that balance of people too, where you may not have all the ideas, you may not have the ability to implement the processes, but who can you leverage to make those kinds of things happen? So,
Yeah,
John,
no,
additional thoughts?
yeah, absolutely about that. And I think that goes to the point of when you cultivate this culture that allows people to take risk, they are going to bring you ideas, and they have to feel like that they can share them and you're going to be open to them. We had, my right hand person that I had, I would say, okay, yeah, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to do it. And she would look at me and she'd go, okay. And I was like, no, you're thinking something. You need to tell me what you're thinking because you're holding back on me. And she would say, well, this is why I think your idea isn't going to work. And I'd be like, okay. I'd listen to her, and probably, half the time she was 100% right. We'd go with her idea instead of mine. The other half, yeah, maybe I knew something she didn't, of no, we got to do it this way,
Yeah.
but I loved having that type of relationship that, one, I knew when she was just nodding at me because I was her boss, and I could call her on it, but that it was a safe place to share those kinds of ideas.
For sure. And that has to come from the leader. The willingness to be open, the willingness to let your employees, or maybe if you're in upper management, the middle management, share with you, that willingness to have people be open and honest and share, and either admit when they think something's going to fail or even admit when things do go wrong. That's something that the leader has to do and has to open up
Mm-hmm.
for, which is important. So,
Yeah, yeah, and you think about. I love what you said. Things are going wrong. With a healthy culture, someone sees their idea starting to go sideways, instead of trying, oh, I got to fix this because I'm going to get in trouble. Well, they go to their leader, hey, this is going sideways, I really need help. And I think that's another byproduct of having this kind of culture.
absolutely, I would agree. So, John, we are coming up towards the end of our time. So, I want to give you a moment. Any final thoughts on the culture of failure or culture for failure? Any final thoughts, points, advice that you want to throw in for our audience here?
Well, I guess, I'll kind of circle back a little bit to, trust your people, explain the intent of what you want to happen, and let them grow. Because, as a leader, your success really isn't about, the metrics you end up delivering. It's about the people you end up delivering to the organization, or out into the world. And I know when I was leaving my last 3PL, somebody called me and said, "Hey, I just want you to know what a difference you made in my career, because I was really nervous about this presentation, and you told me not to worry about it. If you fell on your face, you fell on your face. Nobody was going to shoot you." And he said that did so much for my confidence, and now I'm in a completely different trajectory with my career because I knew it was going to be okay. And for me, that's what being a leader is about, is developing your people.
That's great. And that's a good kind of final thought. So I've got two wrap up questions that I love to ask my guest when they're on. So I hope you're ready for these. So
Bring it.
the first one that I'll hit you with is a book recommendation. So I know you, when we worked together, your office, you had books in there, different kinds of books and topics. But I always like to ask my guests if they have a book that they would recommend out for other leaders to read or check out at some point.
So I mean, it's funny you asked, because I was referencing this book this morning, getting ready for this. It's an older book. It's called 30 Management Principles in the Marine Corps, and one of them is reward failure. So it's an older book. It's not a long read, but the author does a good job of translating into the business world really how the Marine Corps manages their people.
That's a good, interesting recommendation. And I know that's unique to you since that's something that comes from the Marine Corps. So for our podcast audience, the information on that book will be down in the description if you're interested in checking that out. So you can check the description, the name and author will be listed there. John, one other question for you I have is if you could give one bit of advice for somebody that's a young professional, an up and coming leader, really getting started in kind of that leadership, what's one bit of advice from your career, all the years that you've spent, that you would want them to know as an important thing getting started?
I think it's be yourself. And then I know that's a little bit cliche, but if you're in an organization that you can't be the person you are because of culture or whatever, or maybe you're just in the wrong job, you know, if you try to fake it and fit in, you're not going to be happy. Life's too short these days to not be happy. There's enough stuff to stress and worry about. And I guess the other thing I'll add, I'm going to give you two, as I don't listen very well. But, I told, I would tell my team, I told them this all the time, especially when things were going sideways, is, nobody's going to shoot you over this. You will survive this and just get through it.
Yeah. So for the podcast audience, that second bit of advice, that was completely free, no extra charge for that one. So we got you covered. So one thing that came to mind as you were sharing that little bit of advice, and I'll throw this in here. There's a pastor here in the United States, and he has a leadership podcast that he talks about. But I love one quote that he says quite often. It's kind of the motto of his podcast, and it's Craig Rochelle, and he always says, people would rather follow a leader who is always real than one who is always right. And when you talk about authenticity or being yourself, that's something I fully believe in. I know John Maxwell teaches it. Craig Rochelle teaches it. I know other leaders, they talk about that. You have to be yourself. You have to be real. You have to be authentic. You have to be vulnerable. Our topic today, you have to be open, accepting of failure, and then being willing to move on past it. People want leaders who are real and authentic now more than ever. I see that a lot in business studies, business journals. People want real, authentic leadership, not somebody sitting in an office halfway around the country, just bossing them around. They want somebody who's real. And so I think this is a relevant topic and a great topic for today. And I think that was some good advice to kind of wrap us up and end us on. John, I just want to say again, thank you for joining me on an episode here of the podcast. I know I was excited to reach out. I've reached out to some people, and some people don't want to jump on a podcast or do a podcast, but I appreciate the willingness just to come and share some of the knowledge and wisdom you've gained over the years with us today.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It's been fun catching up and great to have you on for a chat. So, John, for your business, I'll do this as one last thing. Your business and also your LinkedIn, if you will, share us the name of your business again, and then I'll also leave your LinkedIn in the description of the podcast as well. So if people want to follow you, find out more about you, or reach out, they can as well. But if you don't mind just mentioning your business one more time.
Sure. Tone Solutions, LLC.
Okay.
I have a partner. She's in Charlotte, and I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas. But I'll share all that stuff with you, Nick, and you can put it out there.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to. Thanks, John. And thank you, podcast listeners. Be sure to check back again next week for another episode here of the Dyson Leadership Podcast.